We have a few questions, and I've got one. I've got a question myself. I've got a theory that many of the problems that we've got in the U.S. right now have their root in the manufacturing base in the U.S. getting cut down significantly to where, in my family, my father had 9 brothers and sisters in Ohio. And out of those, 5 of them worked in steel mills, car factories, brickyards, made good money, made $75,000 a year, made twice as much money as my father, who was a school teacher. And 2 of the kids were school teachers, and the other kids were all working class. And what do their kids look like? Their kids are working in Walmart for $15 an hour, right? Like they're the opposite of what Elle said. And that's the root of it. And I think my theory is we're only seeing the very beginning of it, because automation is going to take that to an entirely other level, where jobs, truck driving jobs, restaurant jobs, all those jobs are going to go away at some point. I think very few people have been talking about that. And I'm wondering if you've thought of that and what your ideas are on that.
I think it's a temptation, but a danger to say that the long-term health of the American economy depends on some quantity of the economy being manufactured, quantity X. I don't know what it is. Actually, the manufacturing capacity of the United States is 15% larger today than it was in 2001 when China joined the World Trade Organization. It's 66% larger than it was in 1994 when NAFTA was passed. We're still manufacturing a lot of stuff, but we're doing it with so many fewer manufacturing workers because of astonishing improvements in productivity, some of which has to do with the automation you rightly cite. So I don't think it's healthy for the United States to say, we know the portion of our economy that should be manufacturing, and B, we know how to bring that about and where to locate it. I imagine the relatives of yours you were talking about live in Eastern Ohio?
Actually Northeastern.
Northeastern, exactly. Well,
yeah.
Just over the border in Pennsylvania is where a lot of my family is from, Western Pennsylvania, the Monongahela Valley, Denora, Charlevoix. Ground zero for the collapse of the steel industry.
Sure.
And politicians periodically go in there and say, we're going to reverse that where the jobs are coming back, to which the answer is no, they aren't. And it's a fool's errand to try and reassure people that we can restore the 1950s in Western Pennsylvania.
And probably we shouldn't want to, because
quite.
You don't want to go backwards. We want to go forward.
It's how you manage the transition and what that looks like, right?
But I think what you bring up is a really interesting point, in that I think the one change that we're seeing, one massive change that we're seeing, is every technological advancement. There was always, this is the end of labor. These people are going to be out of work, and it's just, hand-wringing because they're never going to find a job, right? Once we went from the horse and buggy to a car, it was going to be the end of all these industries, and death and destruction was going to follow. And it never has. But I think there's an argument to be made that this time it actually is different, because every time before, there was still plenty of jobs available in which you could use more of your body than your mind, right? Because you could go into different manufacturing. Instead of using your body to create one thing, you could go and create another. But that type of work, as we get more and more into the robotics, as we get more and more into artificial intelligence, that kind of work is getting fewer and fewer. Even for cleaning one's home, more and more robotics are capable, and just the products are there. So that physical labor, I think over time is going to be shrinking. And that goes to then, I believe, education, which I'm hoping that this pandemic started giving us a highlight how we can really change a portion of the economy that has been stagnant for over 100 years. We still teach in very much the same way. You put a person in the front of a room, you have a bunch of people sitting at desks,
Yes.
and they sit there and they take notes, and nothing has changed. Yet we have all this massive technology where we could teach people something different, and we still have the same format where you go through some sort of your basic education, and then you go on to secondary, you get a degree, maybe a master's degree, maybe a PhD, and then you're done. Now you're good, you're educated. That's not the way the world works anymore. I mean, right now, with the pace of innovation, we need to be constantly educating ourselves. Perhaps this pandemic kind of pushed that forward, where some of the greatest instructors in the world can be available to everyone, and that we can learn in a different way.
Well, good luck changing our sclerotic public education system, which is, as we know, and I don't want this to sound partisan, but the simple truth is firmly in the grip of teachers' unions, who stand to defend their monopoly, their near monopoly on education. Beyond that, you do point to the heart of the current saliency of the issue of inequality, and that is that we are becoming a society cognitively stratified. Those who go to university, those who go to the best universities, those who get advanced degrees after their undergraduate experience are winners in the new economy, and they're going to continue to be. And those with only a high school education are feeling more and more left behind. And this in a country, frankly, where we need welders more than we need graduates with bachelor's degrees in gender studies and movie criticism.
With $100,000 in debt to get that degree.
Yes. Well, you know, someone did, when North Dakota was still booming in its energy eruption a few years ago, someone did the arithmetic. If you graduated from high school, went to community college for 6 weeks, became a welder, and went to North Dakota, you would earn about what, maybe slightly more than a first-year graduate of Harvard. So one of the things we have to do is to reassign status in a way so that people don't feel that life is meaningless and they are superfluous unless they have a college degree. There's an enormous amount of work to be done that does not require a college degree, and probably 40% of American jobs are like that. They are in no sense requiring a four-year college degree.
Well, would you say, I look at what's gone on with higher education, and it looks an awful lot to me like what happened with housing. The government decided that, right?
Yes.
Government decided that communities were much better off. Crime went down, and communities were much better off if everyone owned a home. So what are we going to do? We're going to make it easier for everyone to own a home. Fantastic. Okay. You create a massive housing bubble because you reduced the price of owning a home, and you mistook the attributes of home ownership for owning a home. And now we've done the same thing with education. We want everyone to have an education, and who can possibly argue with that? Like, you want everyone to have an education, except the way we went about it is to create this unbelievable bubble in the cost of education. So now, instead of homeowners that have 1% down and a massive mortgage that they can't possibly afford, you have students with an education that makes absolutely no sense in a mountain of debt.
You're absolutely right. The government decided in the years before 2008 that it just knew the proper level of home ownership in the United States. And such arrogance on the part of government always precedes a great fall. And you're absolutely right. They have decided that they just know how many people ought to go to college, and they're going to make that happen if possible. We're not doing anyone a favor with this. And by the way, when kids go to college who really don't want to go and don't know why they're there, we know from ample data that people are reading less, writing less, studying less at college than they used to do. You can buy a t-shirt, by the way, I recommend it, that says college, those magic 7 years between high school and your first warehouse job. It's, a college degree has been radically devalued, as it is, it's like print enough money, you devalue the currency. Print enough college diplomas, you devalue them also.
There's one group that benefited from that. the people running the universities.
Yes, and the people running the university, we've long since passed the point where non-teaching, non-classroom university employees now outnumber the classroom employees. The administrative bloat in higher education is stunning.
Yeah.
And again, it's become a parasitic, self-dealing, self-regarding industry that, frankly, if the pandemic is a bit of creative destruction for it, all the better.
We've got a few good questions from the audience. First one from Jonathan Mazer. What is the future of NATO?
That's an excellent question. And assuming that Mr. Putin continues to be as menacing as he has, there will be a NATO, and we might even get the NATO members to comply with the NATO requirement that they spend 2% of GDP on defense. NATO has, however, deep problems. Turkey is a member of NATO. Turkey is on this tiptoeing close to war with another member of NATO, Greece. And Turkey, a member of NATO, has just bought from Russia an air defense system, which is a funny way for a member of NATO to behave. So NATO has, on the one hand, with Putin, it has an incentive to get serious. On the other hand, it has some members who make getting serious increasingly difficult.
What do you think about the U.S.'s relationship with NATO?
Well, the United States is quite dependent upon NATO. The idea that we have troops in Europe long after the Second World War. We have troops in Korea long after the end of the Korean War. And frankly, it's a bargain having in there. It's a lot cheaper to have 20 or 30,000 troops in Korea than it is to have a war with North Korea. So I think the United States is going to be a strong supporter of NATO for the foreseeable future.
Another question here from Elizabeth Kashner. In your opinion, what's the best way to remedy the degradation of political norms and adherence to the rule of law?
Elect a gentleman. Ladies and gentlemen, that is, people with good manners, you can't unring a bell and you can't unsay the things that the current president has said. And you can't pretend that what he's done to American discourse didn't happen and won't leave a mark. But just as we've seen how one person could, in 4 years, make a radical change for the worse, in my judgment, in the tone of American life, the obverse of that is that someone with a very different approach can have, perhaps in 4 more years, equal consequence on the upside. So there is simply no substitute for men and women in public life who understand that, as in our normal lives, it's the unwritten rules, it's the manners, the mores, and the customs, not laws, but customs that make life livable. And to get back to that
discourse
would be a blessing, but it's perfectly possible to do.
Here's an interesting one that definitely is in the zone of things you talk about. Biden voting counties equals 70% of the American economy. What does that mean for the nation's political economic divide? And I think this also ties back to Electoral College, which I know you talk about. Some of the question. Anyway, I'd love you to address that.
Well, that statistic is very ominous for the Republican Party, because the Republican Party is the party right now of rural America. That's 17% of America is rural at this point. The distant suburbs, whereas the Democratic Party does have the vibrant cities, the university towns, Palo Alto, Madison, Ann Arbor. There is a vibrancy and a creativity in America. It's still the envy of the world. And the Republican Party is decreasingly representing that and decreasingly competitive in it. And the Republican Party's future depends on correcting that.
How much do you think that that depends on sort of a radicalized political system with gerrymandering and some of the other issues that have really tilted things radical right, radical left?
I think gerrymandering reform would be welcome, but it's a lot of places it's not going to happen because it's one of the perks and spoils of politics in most states, and the political class of both parties wants to keep it for when they're in power. But beyond that, I don't think that's the heart of the matter. The heart of the matter is we need a vibrant two-party system, and right now the Republican Party is not competing for the American future. It's trying to restore the American past. The 1950s are as gone as the steel mills in Denora, Pennsylvania.
I guess to me, the question is, what do you think about the rise of populism? I'm actually surprised that the left hasn't come up with a stronger populist answer than they have to Trump, because it seems like there's a dynamic in that direction.
I'm not sure there is. Populists have, the populist wave in Europe seems to be receding, in Austria and France and post-Brexit Britain. Populism it's a form of anger, and anger tends to burn itself out. Anger tends to be negative, it tends to be cathartic, but it doesn't tend to crystallize into a permanent governing mode. We've had populists before. George Wallace was a populist in 1968. Ross Perot was a populist in 1992. Huey Long was a populist in the 1930s. But none of them had staying power. All of them were dependent upon vivid personalities, Wallace, Perot, and Huey Long, and political movements that depend on necessarily transitory personalities are unstable.
It's not exactly inspirational.
I'm not a little ray of sunshine. I understand that.
No, I mean the populist,
Right.
the populist that's based on anger is not exactly
Yeah.
something that can be inspirational. And I think back to when the United States really became more unified, and in my lifetime, the only time I really saw that was when America was coming out of the 70s depression. And I know it was just a recession, but it sure felt like a depression. And we had a president who said, no, it's not the government, it's you. It's you, the American people. You are an amazing people. You don't need us. You just need us to get out of your way, and you can do incredible things. And Americans believed that. And you saw an election landslide. Since then, it's been more and more, I think a lot of what we're seeing is more a loss in faith in our own institutions. And we were talking a bit about bringing the civility back into public discourse. And one of the things I'd love to get your take on with that is the office of the presidency, and how we've seen, I would argue, it's been expanding for quite a while, but it really expanded its powers under George W. Bush. I think Karl Rove really knew how to push the envelope there. Obama took that ball, ran with it, and then Trump, I believe, took that to a whole nother level. And I don't think that's really good. That was not the intent. You know, if anything, the founding fathers were most afraid of having a strong executive branch. I think it doesn't serve the republic well to have that. Do you see there being a possibility? And also, it seems to me the American people start to look at the president as a bit of a king, like he's going to save me.
Yes.
And that was never the intention. The fact that Americans care so deeply and passionately that they're losing their minds crying over.
I entirely agree that a restoration of Madisonian constitutional equilibrium requires reining in the rampant presidency, and that requires revitalizing Congress, which the president hasn't usurped powers. Powers have been thrust upon it by a Congress eager to shed its responsibilities. Now, that said, here's the cheerful part. Joe Biden was in Congress for 36 years. Gerald Ford and Lyndon Johnson, the only two presidents remotely like that, and they each had 24 years in Congress. Mitch McConnell, who's much the most important Republican in Washington now and for the foreseeable future, has also been in Congress for 36 years. Between them, these two men, with 72 years of Senate experience, are institutionalists. They like the institutions, the institution in which they prospered and really grew up. Remember, Joe Biden was elected to the Senate 2 months before he was old enough to serve in it. So he became a senator at age 30. Mitch McConnell, who I consider a good friend, Mitch McConnell at age 22 was working in the Senate mailroom and then as a staffer for a Republican senator from Kentucky. So these are institutionalists who I think want the Senate and Congress to be a vital part of American governance. That's my hope. And I think it's not ill-founded.
Well, I want to be respectful of your time, Mr. Will. Really appreciate you coming in tonight. Extremely enjoyable for all of us. I hope all of you enjoyed it as much as we did. Well, I think we can call it a wrap here at Spark Disruptors. Thanks to everyone for sticking through with us. We'll be back in February with another program, and hope you enjoyed your day.